road trip with my parents and siblings. My brother was 16 at the time and my half-sister was 21. I don't completely remember where we were going or where we stayed since it was almost 15 years ago. All I remember was that we rented a cottage in a small village. Next to the village was a lot of mountains surrounding the perimeter, and there were probably only 20 houses in the village. Next to the cottage was a small lake that was big enough to kayak in, and to the right of the little lake was a small shed. The shed was very old, and its ceiling had been poorly repaired. There was ivy growing all over it. Although this may not seem scary, the door was wide open and the place we were staying at was all fenced off with a really high fence. This probably meant that no one would be able to come into our property. Later that same day, my brother and I decided to check it out since we had nothing else to do other than swim in the lake before dinner. Bear in mind, this happened in the winter, meaning it would get dark much earlier than in the summer. We walked up towards the shed, and as we walked towards it, we realized that a source of light was shining through the ceiling. It didn't seem like it was a normal ceiling light, but was almost like a torch. We saw the light slowly move around in between the cracks of the shed. Then, in one sudden motion, the light randomly pointed at us. My brother and I were petrified by the situation. We both looked at each other with blank expressions. Our parents were in the lounge watching TV, so they wouldn't be able to hear us at all if we cried out for help. I don't like to be cliché, but my big brother is a very strong person, emotionally, physically, and mentally. So I was surprised when I saw his lower lip tremble out of the corner of my eye. I thought he was going to protect me by telling me what to do, but instead he just stood there, frozen, like me, with a petrified face as the bright light blinded us through the gaps between the walls of the shed for what felt like an eternity. Suddenly, the light switched off. A small sense of relief hit me as the light turned off, but I was still scared for my life. Because the light was shining on our faces for so long, our eyes were not used to the dark. When we tried to escape by running in the opposite direction towards the cottage, we couldn't see where we were going. Then, as if the situation couldn't get any worse, we heard a loud shuffling sound coming from the shed. We could hear the sound starting to crescendo as we ran silently towards the cottage. The sound was getting louder and louder. Soon after, I could just make out a hollow voice coming from behind us. I hesitantly looked behind me. To my horror, I saw a middle-aged man standing next to the shed with a flashlight in his hand. His hands were covered in what looked like blood, and his hair was greasy as if he never showered once in his life. He had a long beard that looked tangled and disgusting. In a faint voice, he said, "Come here, child. I have many toys in here. Do you want to play some games with me?" He said this with a creepy smile and eyes wide open without blinking. He looked as if he was talking to me. I instantly screamed as loud as I could, and my brother grabbed my hand with dear life as we sprinted back into the cottage. We told our parents what happened, and I hugged my brother and sister with tearful eyes. They didn't believe us at first because they were so shocked by the situation and so confused. But when they saw the monstrous man's face pressed up against the window with a bloody butcher's knife in his hand, they screamed in horror and immediately called the police. The police were nearby since it was a small town, but as the sirens came, we saw the man run back to his shed, and unfortunately, they never caught him. They asked us what he looked like and what he said to us. The police told us that a girl that looked similar to me, and was roughly the same age as me, was murdered last month because of that man we saw from the shed. I can't imagine what would have happened if we stayed in a busy town that weekend, or if the police didn't make it in time. I am now scared to go near sheds after that incident, and I will never be the same. A situation like this has not happened since, but I really hope that man is either caught or is being chased by the police, because those few moments scarred me for life.
Saturday afternoon, my cousins were staying with my family over the weekend. My parents had to head over to the store, and my cousins and I decided to go to the nearby park to play. Before we left, we made sure the door was locked like we were supposed to. However, by the time we came back, I could see the door was open. There were even scratch marks on the handle, as if someone had tried to pick the lock by force. My older cousin Sam called my parents, and they said they were on their way. Stupidly, we thought the intruder had left already, so we ended up going into the house. That was a mistake. My younger cousin, who was 9 years old at the time, had to go to the bathroom, but when he stepped out, his face was frozen with fear. We asked him what happened, but he couldn't speak at all, just pointed at the bathroom. I slowly opened the door, and what I saw made my heart drop. A blood-soaked man was dead in the bathtub. I checked if he was breathing, but couldn't feel anything. It looked as if someone had attacked him. My cousins and I started panicking, realizing that there must be a second intruder somewhere in the house. We cowered together in the living room and waited for my parents. When they finally arrived, they called the police right away. During their investigation, they found out that those two men had escaped from a mental hospital nearby. It turned out that they were both trying to rob my house, when one of the men lost his mind and ended up killing the other. From that day on, my parents never dared leave me home alone. I always double-check the door before I leave. Now I'm 15 years old, and my family has moved to Florida. However, I don't think I will ever forget the memory of that dead man in our bathtub.
It happened recently, and it happened over the span of a couple of years. My mom still doesn't want to really admit how bad the situation really was, but she's probably still in a little bit of denial from it. She met this guy that I'll call Joe when I was 5 years old. We had just moved to Indiana, and she was still with my dad, but they had split up shortly after, and then her and Joe started dating. We moved to Florida to live with my grandparents for a few years, but they still kept talking. Fast forward a few years, and I'm now around 14. I also have a sister, and she's 6 years younger than me. She was also heavily affected by what happened, as she had to witness everything firsthand. Anyways, fast forward a few years, and Joe and my mom started seriously dating again, and they wanted to get married. I always got really bad vibes from him, and I tried telling my mom, but she didn't listen. Joe was a smoker, and my mom hated it. He also used to have a drinking problem, but my mom didn't really know just how bad it was until after they got married. I went to go live with my older sister for a few months, for reasons that I don't want to disclose, but my mom and Joe got married during those few months. When I went back to living with my mom, Joe was now living with us. We had a small 2-bedroom house, and me and my sister had to share a room, but my sister would still sleep in my mom's room because she was scared of the dark. So she was sleeping in the same room as Joe, too. Now, I'm gonna go ahead and explain all the messy shit that happened. Joe started drinking again. He would be drunk all the time, and he would steal my mom's money for beer. My mom tried to send him to rehab a couple times, but it didn't work. When Joe finally got a job again after being fired from his last job, he would hide money, and he wouldn't help my mom with the bills. They were married now, so I mean, it only made sense that they would both pay the bills and stuff. My mom and him would constantly fight about money, him drinking, him sneaking off to buy beer, him stealing, etc. It was pretty traumatic to hear them fight almost every night, and I felt really bad for my sister having to hear it too. Joe would hide his car keys to hide stuff in his car, and my mom once found weed in there. Joe once even stole money from my little sister for whatever he needed. He would also get the only most expensive gas for his car, so he needed hundreds of dollars every month from my mom for that. When he got fired from his first job, he had just sold his gun. And it's a good thing he did because he went to his boss, and my mom believes that he would have tried to kill her if he still had his gun. Anyways, my mom kicked him out several times but always brought him back, even though me and my sister always begged her not to. At one point he bribed us with Apple Watches, which didn't really make us hate him any less, by the way. And at one point he was drunk in bed, saying he was going to kill himself, and my mom told me to call 911. My sister was in the room while everything happened. Joe had even cheated on my mom during one of the times she kicked him out. My mom finally kicked him out for good after a couple of years, and he went back to the woman he cheated with. That's when the phone calls, emails, texts, and even the threats all began. They would constantly call us and text us, blaming my mom for everything that happened and saying really terrible things about her and making up lies. He was always drunk whenever he would call. One time his new girlfriend even threatened to cut my mom's throat. That was the final straw, and when we decided to call the cops. They couldn't really do anything about it though. The calls and the texts wouldn't stop. My mom kept getting emails up until a few months ago. I'm 17 years old now, and me and my sister are still really traumatized. It felt like my mom chose him over us, and I'm still really hurt over it. But I really just hope to never see Joe again.
Most of my family had already told me the gifts I would receive, like a new Wii along with video games for it. My grandmother didn't tell me anything. Now, my grandmother had always been a strange woman. She wasn't very talkative, but I liked to hear the stories she told. They were creepy, but intriguing. She told me she was going to give me a book. She didn't show it to me, nor did she tell me what it was about. Once my birthday rolled around, I was opening gifts from my loved ones. When I got to my grandmother's present, I opened it up and I saw a book with a pentagram carved into its front cover. I picked it up and thought nothing of it, because at the time, I didn't know what the shape was or what it meant. As soon as I grabbed it, though, everything went pitch black. When I woke up, my family was surrounding me, and my mom was scolding my grandmother about giving me the book. My grandmother looked at me, but her eyes were evil-looking. That night, when I went to bed, I was having a pretty good dream. But suddenly, something woke me up. I looked around and saw nothing. Then, suddenly, I saw a shadowy figure in the doorway looking at me. This wasn't a case of sleep paralysis because I was able to move, but that didn't comfort me because that meant it was real life. The figure crept closer and closer to me. When I looked closer at the figure, I saw gray hair and crooked teeth. That's when I knew it was my grandmother. I screamed and ran past her, but she grabbed me and tossed me back. I noticed she had something in her hand, but I couldn't tell what it was. I saw one of my toys that I had gotten a few years ago, picked it up and threw it at her. She fell to the ground and I ran past her, telling my parents. My parents called the police and they got there and arrested her. The thing she had in her hand was a knife, and she was planning on killing me. To this day, I wonder what would have happened if that toy wasn't lying there.
This happened when I was in college. I was 20 at the time, studying for an upcoming exam in biology. That is, until my roommate busted in my room. She wasn't yelling, but I could see she was drunk by her excitement. I rolled my eyes and sighed. I completely lost focus now. But it was okay. I'd kind of gotten used to her behavior. She was a party girl while I was, well, a nerd. I tried to get back on my reading tracks again, but she patted me on the back and drunkenly giggled before speaking. "Come on, Jasmine. Every time I see you, you're always reading a book." I sighed before speaking. "And every time I see you, you smell of alcohol and vomit." She frowned at me. "How about this? I'll be quiet all week if you come to this party tomorrow at 8. I wanted to say no, but then I thought about it. I mean, I do always work really hard. Besides, she won't barge in like this for the whole week? Sounds too good, I thought to myself, so I nodded and continued to read. We got ready. I hadn't dressed up in ages, so I was kind of excited. The party was loud, filled with drunk people making out, bumping and dancing. The party was hosted in a basement-like setting, only it was much bigger and had a lot of space. I'm not going to lie, I did have a few drinks. I wasn't drunk, but I was definitely tipsy. So, as my view became tilted, this guy comes out of nowhere and has small talk with me. He was fairly attractive. He didn't seem drunk. We met and exchanged names. From what I remember, he had red dyed hair and blue eyes. He was white and about 6 feet. His name was Luke. We laughed and talked about topics like studying and books and that kind of thing. The talking went on for about a half an hour. He then said, "Hey, I'm going to get another drink. Want anything?" And I said, "Why not? I mean, I'm having fun." So later on, he came back with drinks. And the next thing I remember, we were making out in the corner of the party room. It was so quick, and then he asked me, "Want to go back to my place?" Which I politely declined. I already know what he wants. Besides, I needed to be on campus in the morning. "Come on, I promise it will be fun." I remember that he kept on trying to get me to go, but he gave up after I made it clear I wasn't interested in going to his place. He rolled his eyes angrily and gave me a paper with a number on it. "Fine. If you change your mind, give me a call." He leaned close to me and whispered against my ear. Then he walked out, and the rest of the night was a complete blank. The next day, I woke up inside my college bedroom, on my bed, next to my roommate snoring on her bed as well. As I got up to shower, a paper fell out of my pocket. It was the number, which made me remember that guy. But I had more important things now. I showered then and went to study. I remember reading my book when all of a sudden I felt dizzy. Then I woke up in the bed with police officers and nurses talking next to me. Turns out I had this dangerous allergic reaction that could only be caused from saliva or any bodily fluids that had come from decaying or rotting flesh. Which to my surprise was weird. I hadn't been kissing anyone, let alone ate anything raw. Then I remembered the guy. I told the police about the guy at the party and gave them the number he gave me. A few weeks passed and my allergies went down so I could live my life normally. I just finished my test when my phone rang. I answered it and it was the police. Turns out the guy from the party had 2 dead, decaying women's bodies inside his apartment that he ate. They must have been there for months. My heart dropped. The thought that I made out with someone who ate human flesh, or even worse, was what if I had agreed to come to his place? I may have been one of those bodies.
19 years old at the time. I was up late the night before into the early morning studying, and I hadn't had much sleep, so I had just woken up from a nap. I decided to hop in the shower to wake myself. That's when I heard this weird scraping sound coming from somewhere outside. I stopped the shower and peered out from behind the curtain, and then made my way over to the window. I saw nothing, but I could still hear the noise. I thought it may have been my neighbor working in a shed, so I ignored the disturbance and finished up in the shower. Before I continue, I should inform you that I have severe anxiety problems, and I often get a little paranoid sometimes. It also doesn't help that I have PTSD as well. Anyways, I was now back in my room, and I took a seat on my bed. I texted my then boyfriend and asked him what he wanted for dinner. While I was waiting for him to respond, I just relaxed and scrolled through my Facebook. I was reading an article about the recent clown sightings that were happening at the time, when I was interrupted by the sound of footsteps coming from outside. I stopped and listened carefully. I heard a few more steps, followed by a tapping noise. I was a bit confused by this. It hadn't yet occurred to me that I had an unwelcomed guest outside. I was thinking why my boyfriend hadn't knocked on the door or called before he showed up. We usually had a routine with things like this, especially if I was home alone. He would either text, call, or FaceTime me to let me know when he was on his way home, or if he was at the door, because there had been a lot of shady activity around our neighborhood at the time. I then called out to him, and suddenly, all fell silent. I texted him and asked if he was at the door. There was no reply, so I decided to peek through the bedroom window. While I was making my way to the other side of the room, my phone started ringing. It was my boyfriend wanting to FaceTime. When I answered, he said he was about 15 minutes away. As I was talking to him, I pulled back the curtains of my bedroom window, and that's when all the blood in my veins turned to ice as I came face to face with a fucking clown. I know I wasn't hallucinating. An actual clown was looking at me through the window, smiling. After my initial shock, I actually started to laugh, thinking that this had to be some kind of prank my boyfriend was pulling on me. So I played along, pretending to be terrified, and whispered into the phone, "Very funny, asshole. Love the whole scary clown thing." I chuckled and rolled my eyes. My boyfriend was confused, and I explained to him about the clown at the window and said that he and his friend did a good job scaring the piss out of me. He seemed confused, saying that all of his friends were hanging out at the pub and that he was not a part of any plan to prank me. Upon hearing this, I felt my stomach in my throat as I looked back at the clown, who was still just outside my window. He reached into his costume and pulled out a very real-looking butcher's knife. By this point, I wasn't sure what was going on, so I grabbed my baseball bat. My boyfriend told me that he was now only a few minutes away. He shouted at me to stay inside and to lock all the doors and windows. I quickly closed the curtains and went into the lounge. It wasn't long before I heard a loud pounding on the front door. Suddenly, I heard a creepy voice coming from the other side.
"Let me in, child."
I didn't respond to the voice. I just stood perfectly still, waiting for the next move. Loud pounding rang out again, causing the door to rattle on its hinges, but I kept quiet, even when I heard the doorknob rattling. Although I was pretty scared at this point, I was also getting a tad irritated and yelled out to the clown, "Fuck off! Go annoy someone else!" I then heard muffled laughter, followed by the creepy voice.
"Please let me in, doll. I just want to play. I want to play with your insides."
I had enough of this. I was about to go out and confront this creepy asshole myself when I heard my boyfriend's voice, who was still on the phone, say, "Hang up and call the cops." After some consideration, I thought that maybe confronting the creepy clown outside with a butcher's knife was not the correct course of action. So I did as my boyfriend said. I left the lounge and was soon explaining to the police dispatcher the situation. I was on my way back to my room when I heard the sound of glass breaking. I stopped in my tracks and told them that I think the clown just broke into the house. They immediately told me to get somewhere safe, and that's when I heard my ex yelling out, "Hey, what the fuck are you doing? Get the hell out of here. The police are on the way." The clown just bellowed out a psychotic laugh and took off. As I made my way back into the bedroom, something caught my eye. I peered out the window. Through a gap in the curtains, I saw another clown. He appeared to be holding some kind of saw blade in his hand. I went to move, but I was like a deer caught in the headlights. I couldn't move or scream. Fear then overcame me, as I realized my boyfriend was now out there with 2 creepy clowns. I screamed into the phone, "There's another clown outside my bedroom. Please hurry." After a few moments, I was relieved when I heard my boyfriend at the back door. I quickly let him inside. We then held each other tightly until the police arrived. After taking our statements, the police discovered a rusted hacksaw and an axe lying on the ground outside of my bedroom window. There were red marks all over them. Of course, the creepy clowns that had turned my night into a freak show were nowhere to be found. After that night, I struggled to fall asleep. I often think to myself, what would have happened to me if I had been stupid enough to open that door? Were they just a couple of thrill seekers looking to frighten a girl who was all alone? Or were they, in fact, out for blood?
So, my parents got me a nightlight to help me get over it. At night, I would wake up and the fear of someone being in my room came to mind. So I would sit up and, thanks to the nightlight, would see no one there. It honestly did the trick. I would have my room partially lit up and would feel safe. Even though my parents slept one door away, I honestly still felt scared before I got it. One day, while my dad was at work, me and my mom had the weekend to ourselves. We went to this large shopping mall to have some fun, buying toys and clothes for me and my mom. I remember seeing this really large play area in the center of the mall. I was so excited, my eyes lit up in excitement. Before I could even say a thing, my mom said I could go there. She knew me well. She would often know what I wanted before I even asked it. I ran over to the play area while my mom sat on a bench close by and watched me like a hawk. I climbed up the slide and there was a network of tubes and windows that you could see through and climb through. Kids were everywhere, going up and down, climbing through the network of tubes. I saw at the end of one of the tubes leading to a little room. It was designed like the front of an airplane. I loved airplanes when I was young, so I immediately crawled through the tubes as fast as I could to get there. When I reached the little front of the airplane room, there were fake buttons you could press that would make beeping noises. There was also a little steering wheel in the front. I pressed the buttons and played with the steering wheel like any little kid would. I just happened to look out of the window to my left and saw a man looking right at me. I remember him wearing a black hoodie and blue jeans. He looked to be in his early 30s. He stared at me with this really yellow, toothy smile. I remember his eyes also looked bloodshot. I realize now that he may have been on something. We stared at each other for at least 6 seconds, and that's when I heard my mom calling my name. I looked to my right window and saw her gesturing for me to come down. I did so, and she grabbed my hand and we left the mall. My mom strapped me in my car seat and she got in the car as well. She made sure no one was around or followed us. Then she locked the doors and told me how she saw the man I was looking at and how he started to look at me the whole time I entered the playground. My mom went on to say that he followed my movements through the windows of the playground. I didn't think much of this, being just a little kid, so I brushed it off. That night, my dad called my mom, saying how he was stuck at work doing overtime due to the lack of employees who were available that night. My mom then said, "Okay, bye, I love you." She hung up the phone and prepared me for bed. She plugged in my nightlight, tucked me in bed, and kissed me goodnight. Hours passed, and I remember waking up early. I tried looking at my alarm clock. I purposely kept it at the end of my nightstand, so I could always read it right there instead of having to get up out of bed to look at it. But I couldn't even see my alarm clock. It was pitch black darkness. All I could see were my bed sheets. Literally nothing else was visible in my room. I then realized my nightlight wasn't plugged in. But my mom plugged it in, I thought. That's when the fear set in. The fear of someone being in my room with me. Right when the fear started to set in, I heard a loud creak right in front of my bed. A cold chill went through my body when this happened. I instantly scrambled to reach for my lamplight and turned it on. Right when I did this, I saw a man staring at me with bloodshot eyes at the foot of my bed. He then smiled in this toothy yellow smile. I screamed as loud as I could with fear. The man then bolted and jumped out of my window right before my mom came in, but she wasn't fast enough to see the man leaving. I told her there was a man in my room. At first, she didn't believe me, but then I told her that my nightlight wasn't plugged in, and how she plugged it in when she tucked me into bed. She paused and thought for a second. I slowly saw her face turn into a horrified look. She ran to our home phone and called the police, then my dad. Looking back at it now, I knew she realized someone had to have been in the room with me, because she knew how afraid I was of being alone in my room in pitch black darkness, and how I would never unplug the nightlight. The cops came and my mom explained to them what happened. Just then, my dad's car pulled up. He ran over to both me and my mom and gave us a big hug, asking if we were alright. The cops took the nightlight, as he had to touch it to unplug it. They said they would look for fingerprints on it, giving this as the only evidence they had. It was unclear how he entered, but we assume he entered through my open window. The policemen searched our property, but found no signs of the man. They also told us that the nightlight had no fingerprints on it, which means he wore gloves. The cops said they would stay outside of our house for the night and see if he would come back. My parents were okay about it and went to bed. I didn't get any more sleep that night, but now that I think about it, the man I saw in the mall smiling at me and the man in my room had to be the same person. They had the same exact smile and bloodshot eyes. Then a sick realization came to my mind. For that guy to know where I live and literally crawl through my window into my room, he would have had to have followed us home. How did he do that? I have no idea. The cops never found the guy. We moved to another town now, and I thankfully grew out of the fear of someone being in my room. I'm 15 now, and I exercise and work out every day. I worked on it, and I have an impressive build for my age. I now met the girl I love, and I recently graduated my freshman year of high school with all A's. I am now having a normal and happy life. I don't let this incident drag me down, because it was from my past, and I realize now, in order to be successful, you have to tend to the future. To everyone watching or listening to this, always be aware of where you are and your surroundings, and if you see someone suspicious or someone watching or following you, get to a crowded area or building where lots of people are immediately. If there's nothing like that and you're all alone, pull out your phone and call the cops. Remember, it's better to be safe than sorry.
Visiting weird websites. I had a lot of time on my hand. Due to not playing sports, nor did I volunteer for anything at all in high school. I told my friend Mark that I was starting to get bored. Honestly, I was bored with what I was experiencing on these websites. He said I should go on the deep web. He and I used to go on the deep web, but never found anything. So I decided to search through some more stuff, a little deeper. I searched for hours every day for about 2.5 months. Still nothing that I hadn't seen already. I told Mark, and of course he said just visit the dark web. When I did go on the dark web, I saw chat rooms, all with different names. I came across one named I, as in EYE. It was all in caps. I entered the chat, but before entering the live chat, you are assigned a number. Mine was P34. I confirmed my number and entered. There were hundreds of people. The comments were coming in quick. At first, I didn't understand what was going on. The screen was black, then a name popped up on the screen that said Mr. Wiggles. The comments immediately stopped and a voice came over my speakers. Welcome, P34. Then his name disappeared off of the screen and the comments continued, everyone giving me welcomes. A few minutes go by, then a countdown from 10 pops up on the screen. Then the chat goes crazy. Once it reached the number 1, the screen went straight to what looks like a view from a camera just watching someone in what looks like at their home. I sat there watching this for 20 minutes and nothing happened, so I shut down my computer. The next day I went to school, had a normal day, went to Walmart, then I went home. I decided to go back on the same chat from before. I confirmed my number P34 and again, there were hundreds of people commenting. Mr. Wiggles popped up and just like before, the comments stopped. Across the screen it said, no new members tonight. Then the countdown started again. Everyone in the chat started going wild. The countdown finished and then it was showing the point of view from a camera again. But it was outside of a school. My school from earlier that day. At that point I was intrigued. I couldn't tell if it was focused on a certain person or just watching the school. After 30 minutes of watching the video, our school bell rang and everyone started to come outside while whoever was recording was positioned across the street in the car. Once everyone came out, the person got out of the car and started to follow a crowd of kids. Everyone started to split from each other and the person recording started to follow someone. It was my friend Mark. He had to be at least 100 feet behind him. I started to call Mark, but he didn't answer. I kept calling him as I watched the video, but nothing. The person followed him to his house and sat outside of his house for a few minutes. The man behind the camera finally said, "No parents are home." And he began to walk to Mark's house, rang the doorbell, and waited as he continued to record. A few seconds go by, and Mark opened the door. He looked confused, and the guy said, "P34 sent me." And Mark looked afraid that the camera shut off and everyone in the chat left. So I did too. I called Mark's house phone instead of his cell phone, and his mother answered. I asked for Mark, and she said that she thought he was with me. I panicked. I then received a notification on my phone from my Gmail account. It said the sender was Mr. Wiggles. The message was, "I'm getting closer, P34. Mark says hi." I was shocked and didn't know what to do, so I called the cops. They didn't do anything about it because the email disappeared. I haven't been on the dark web since, and no one has seen Mark. Still to this day, I receive messages with pictures of me in random places, along with the same written message that said, "It can happen anytime." I honestly wish I never went on the dark web.
Friends with the mailman, who was a really cool guy. His name was Rich. What happened after New Year's was crazy, and for months I saw this man deteriorate into a killer. Rich was an all-around cool guy. He was a good-looking, charismatic mailman who delivered mail around our neighborhood. His baby's mom lived in my projects and Ravenswood houses. He would say hi to everyone, and on Christmas, no matter how poor people were, they often left him a tip in cash. Rich had a dark side to him that involved a fight where he beat his baby's mom and got a restraining order. He broke her orbital bone during an argument. During that year, his girlfriend would often walk around with 2 black eyes or a swollen cheek. He was beating her. He did not show up for 2 weeks because of some departmental procedure suspending him till they found out what the case was about. I saw him 2 weeks later, and Rich was less cheery. The new year brought him a child support garnishment for his kid and legal problems, not to mention problems regarding custody. A few months passed, and I had noticed him staring into the distance of the hot sun. He did not look good. His long stares would be longer and longer, and it would take his name being called 3 times for him to respond. Everyone around the area heard he had broken a court order and beat his girlfriend again. Rich was not the cheery, charismatic man we had once known, but something darker. One day, coming out from work, I see a Telemundo truck with Eyewitness News Channel 7 and a New York One news van. Rich killed his wife and 7-year-old and 13-year-old stepson. Both heads were chopped off. The kid's penis was found in their mouths. Both heads were in a closet. They lived 2 buildings down from me, and my friend was their neighbor. Cops sealed off the building. Rich tried to slit his wrist, but failed and was taken by an ambulance. After detectives left the crime scene 2 weeks later, and everything was concluded, we snuck through my neighbor's yard, who lived next door to the crime scene. All the action took place in the kitchen. There were trails of blood from the living room leading into the bedroom, like the bodies had been dragged. The bedroom had a broken door, but we didn't go inside. This was before crime scene cleanup came. I had nightmares for weeks. There was a boy who lived in my building who was 7, who was friends with Rich's kid. He became completely traumatized after he heard about his friend's death. His mother encouraged me to talk to him, since he looked up to me as a big brother. I remember he asked me, "Why do people hurt kids?" I could only say, "Because they are sick in their heads." He sobbed in front of me, and I, of course, comforted him. From that point on, I had trouble sleeping for a while. Going in the actual murder scene made things much worse. I will always remember a blank stare when I joked around with him. It was like he was staring through me.
Let's start. It was 2006, and my parents were in a town right outside of Frankfurt, Germany, and they were at a pool hall. A couple walked up to them, and the guy named Richard, or Rich, says, "You see, my lovely wife here can't speak English, and you guys look American. Would you care to join us at our house tonight and help my wife learn?" My parents both wanted to help them. My dad said, "Oh, of course we can help." The couple quickly smiled and glanced at each other. My parents were a little creeped out by them. Mom and Dad hopped in the back seat of their car, and the couple drove to their one-story house, and they all hopped out of the car and into the house. Inside, Rich turned on the radio, and an eerie song started playing over and over again. Rich brought out wine, cheese, and crackers. My mom went straight to the cheese and crackers with one sip of wine. My dad, on the other hand, said he wasn't hungry, but Rich insisted my dad try the cheese and crackers, because Rich apparently made the cheese himself. So eventually, my dad ate one cracker with cheese on it, and then a few minutes later, my mom passed out on the couch. Rich went over to my mom and took her jacket off, and offered to take my dad's jacket. And my dad said, "Yeah, sure." After Rich went into their bedroom to put the jackets in the closet, the girl, who was named Gretel, smiled and looked at my parents, then got up to use the bathroom. When Gretel went to the bathroom, my dad carried my mom outside the house and behind a tree and waited for a taxi to take them to the hotel next to the airport. My dad placed my mom in bed, got in next to her, and he fell asleep with my mom still passed out. In the morning, my mom woke up, and they still had one more day until they went home, so they made breakfast of bacon and eggs. Then they went in town to shop. Next they went to lunch at a restaurant, and so on. The next morning they woke up at 5 a.m., got ready and left to board their plane. My dad almost couldn't get on because he was puking so much. It was like in Harry Potter, when Ron accidentally made himself puke slugs. They almost didn't let my dad get on the plane, and my dad never throws up. When they got off, 4 days later, they turned on the radio and heard that a couple in Germany had been asking people to teach the girl English lessons, then put sleep meds in the cheese and in the wine, and soon later, stabbing them. Then my dad remembered what happened a few days ago in Germany. Until this day, my parents still wonder what would have happened if he didn't leave the jackets, grabbed my mom, and ran.